It hurts when a child ignores you, yes, but when they also speak to you disrespectfully and you respond from a place of hurt, what you are doing without realizing it is handing over the wheel. And that is where the disaster begins, because you stop correcting a behavior and start begging for consideration inside your own home. Do not confuse love with permissiveness or patience with weakness. A home with no clear boundaries ends up teaching the exact opposite of what you claim to stand for. Stay with me. Gabriel here. Welcome to the Stoic Garden. Today we are going to walk through 7 tough, practical, necessary points for putting an end to your children's disrespect without falling into yelling, humiliation, or useless scenes that only make everything worse. And if you stay until the end, you will understand how to reclaim your place with firmness, calm, and dignity, so the change does not depend on fear in the moment, but on the kind of respect that is truly built. Let's begin. 1. Do not react in the heat of the moment. The first mistake many parents make when a child disrespects them is believing the problem will be solved by winning that clash in the moment. It will not. In that instant, you are not parenting, you are competing to see who blows up harder. The moment you step into that, you have already lost an essential part of your authority, because you stop being a reference point and become a reaction. And a parent who reacts like a teenager corrects nothing. They just add more noise to the fire. Look at it coldly. Your child throws out a rude remark, cuts you off, speaks to you with contempt, looks at you with that mix of defiance and borrowed superiority, and you feel the heat rise in your chest. That is normal. It hurts. It angers you. It humiliates you. But that is exactly why you cannot respond from that place, because when you speak from a wound, every word comes out looking for revenge, not order. And revenge may give you 5 seconds of relief, but it does not build respect. It only builds fear, resentment, or a habit of chaos. Many people confuse raising their voice with having authority, as if shouting louder automatically turns your truth into law. That is not how it works. In fact, the opposite usually happens. When you raise your voice, you teach the other person that the conversation is decided by emotional intensity, not moral hierarchy. Without meaning to, you are telling them that whoever loses control also loses the right to be heard. And then you are surprised when they do the exact same thing to you. What a wonderful inheritance, right? You ask them for calm while you are shaking with rage. Pausing does not mean swallowing the disrespect. Pausing means refusing to let disrespect set the rhythm of the house. It means stopping the animal dynamic and forcing the conversation to rise to a higher level. Sometimes all it takes is one short, clean, firm sentence. I'm not going to talk to you like this right now. When you are ready to speak respectfully, we will continue. No endless speeches, no explaining yourself as if you need permission to be treated with dignity. You say it and step out of the mud. Because arguing in the heat of the moment with someone who is worked up, even if it is your child, is like trying to comb a hurricane. And here is a truth many people struggle to accept. Your child is not only listening to what you say. More than anything, they are studying how you behave when they challenge you. That is where they learn whether boundaries are real or just decorative. Anyone can sound wise in times of peace. The real question is who you are when you are provoked. Do you still own yourself? Or do you become a loudspeaker for your anger? Do you want to shape an adult? Or are you just unloading the pain of feeling disobeyed? That question is uncomfortable, but it clears up a lot. The pause also has a deeper function. It gives you back internal control. Marcus Aurelius, who was not exactly living a spa life, wrote that the best way to defend yourself from insolence is not to resemble the person committing it. And that was said by a man who ruled an empire, not a couch commentator. In your home, that translates into something very simple. If your child loses respect and you lose control, both of you have dropped lower. But if they sink and you stay steady, the difference between the one who still cannot govern themselves and the one who should know how becomes clear. Lowering your voice does not make you soft. It makes you dangerous in the best sense. Because a calm, steady voice with no tremor communicates something a shout never can: conviction. When a parent speaks without spilling over, they force the other person to face not a storm, but a wall. And you do not argue with a wall. You recognize it. Your calm strips the conflict of its spectacle, and without the spectacle, many acts of defiance lose half their strength. Now, pausing does not mean letting it slide. That is another very common mistake. Some people step away to avoid the problem and then act as if nothing happened. No, that only teaches that disrespect is free. The pause is meant to move the conversation onto the right ground, not sweep the dirt under the rug. Later, when both of you are able to talk, you come back to it and name it clearly. What you said was disrespectful, and it is not going to happen again. That is how you set a boundary. No theatre, no ceremonial tears, no after-lunch soap opera. Once you understand this, something changes inside you. You no longer feel the urge to respond immediately to defend your honor, because you realize your honor does not depend on getting the last word in a moment of emotional garbage. It depends on holding your place without sinking into the degradation of the clash. Maturity is not staying quiet out of fear. Maturity is choosing the moment, the tone, and the posture from which you are going to correct. And in a family that has normalized disorder, that small act of refusing to play the game can be the first real earthquake. What you are doing here is not just avoiding a fight. You are changing the rule of the relationship. You are teaching that in your presence people do not speak from contempt, not because you are some domestic dictator, but because dignity is also part of education. And when a child realizes they can no longer drag you into the mud with one insolent remark, they begin to notice something they had not seen before. The person in front of them is not someone desperate to be obeyed. It is a father or mother who has finally decided to act like an adult, even when the other person does not. 2. Change the setting. Some conversations fail before they even begin, not because of what is said, but because of where and when people try to have them. Trying to correct disrespect in the middle of household chaos, with the TV on, everyone in a rush, pride switched on and nerves flying around, is a pretty clumsy recipe, even if it is dressed up as good intentions. And if you do it through endless messages, even worse. At that point, you're not guiding a child. You are feeding an absurd war where each person reacts only to what suits them to read. Chaos distorts everything. When you speak in the middle of disorder, the other person is not listening to understand. They are listening to defend themselves. They are thinking about how to justify themselves, how to hit back, how to escape, how to slam the door, how to leave you on read as if that were a declaration of independence. And you, on the other side, fall into the trap of insisting more, sending another message, then another, and then that long paragraph that reads like a legal statement. Let us be honest, nobody becomes more respectful after receiving a thesis on WhatsApp. An important conversation needs containment. It needs a space where the body is not in fight mode. That is why it helps to change the setting. Talking when both of you are calm, in a neutral place with no audience, no rush, no screens around, changes the whole dynamic. It is no longer a scene. It is no longer a struggle over who controls the moment. It becomes a conversation with structure. And when you choose the context, you are teaching something crucial. Serious matters are not dealt with in just any state of mind or in just any way. This may seem small, but it is not. Many parents have allowed their children, without realizing it, to define the stage for every conflict. They answer right away, argue in hallways, in the car, in the kitchen, from one room to another, through endless voice notes, through messages typed with rage in their pulse. And then they wonder why nothing changes. Because there is no order. And where there is no order, respect becomes optional. The setting matters because the setting teaches. Seneca, who knew a great deal about living with tension without turning it into a circus, warned that anger is a brief form of madness. We do not need to get solemn to understand that. When a conversation begins in the middle of anger, what governs is not intelligence but impulsiveness. And nobody repairs a relationship from a shared little episode of madness. That is why changing the setting is not manipulation, it is emotional hygiene. It is refusing to argue where all that can come out is garbage. On top of that, choosing a neutral place removes invisible weapons. In the middle of chaos, there are escape routes, interruptions, distractions, other people's faces, doors slamming, scenes escalating through pure contagion. In a calm space, by contrast, everything is more exposed. The behavior is there. The boundary is there. The responsibility is there. And yes, that is uncomfortable, of course it is, but that discomfort is useful. Or do you really think a child is going to reflect seriously while scrolling on their phone, chewing on something, and answering you with half a smirk? What you are lacking is not strategy. What you are lacking is the decision to stop accepting ridiculous settings. Talking in person also has a huge advantage. It lets your presence become part of the message. Your look, your silence, your posture, your calm, all of that communicates. A text does not carry authority. A text gets misunderstood, gets forwarded, gets answered whenever the other person feels like it, and on top of that invites the cowardly boldness of replying with irony from behind a screen. Very comfortable, very brave behind the keyboard. But serious parenting is not something you hand over to a chat. That does not mean you should never use a message. It means you should not turn the phone into the family's main courtroom. A message can help set up a time to talk later, or put an end to a discussion that has already gone sideways. But it cannot resolve what requires moral presence. When respect is involved, the relationship needs a body, a voice, reality. Because one of the great illnesses of this age is believing that any issue can be solved by writing a lot. It cannot. Some things only get put in order when someone sits down, looks the other person in the eye and carries the weight of their words. When you change the setting, you also change the hidden message. You are saying, this is not going to be discussed through shouting, in fragments or whenever you feel like escaping. It is going to be discussed the way serious things are discussed, and that, even if it creates resistance at first, introduces an adult logic into the relationship. You are not begging for attention. You are not chasing your child around the house trying to drag a conversation out of them. You are establishing that respect deserves a framework, and that framework is defined by the one who still understands what is at stake. And notice how powerful this is. You have not shouted. You have not punished yet. You have not thrown out a single theatrical threat. You only changed the setting. But by doing that, you regained position. You regained direction. You regained the chance for the conversation not to become another chapter in the same exhaustion. And when a father or mother learns to pull conflict out of chaos and bring it into a clear space, something very interesting begins to happen. The child can no longer hide so easily in reaction. They have to start facing the substance of what they did, and only there can real change begin. 3. Stop explaining your worth. This point hurts because it touches a very human trap. When a child disrespects you, you feel the urge to remind them of everything you have done for them. You start pulling out the biography, the sacrifices, the sleepless nights, the money spent, the worries you swallowed in silence, the times you were there when no one else was. And even if all of that is true, it almost never works the way you hope. Because in that moment, you are not correcting a behavior. You are trying to get the other person to recognize you emotionally so you can feel validated. And listen carefully to this. Your dignity is not defended by reciting your history of suffering. It is defended by marking facts and agreements. Because when you start saying, after everything I've done for you, look how you repay me, what the other person hears is not always the greatness of the love you gave. Very often they hear guilt, reproach, emotional debt, and instead of reflecting, they harden. Or worse, they learn that every conflict is going to turn into a ceremony where you present your resume as a martyr, exhausting for everyone. You do not need to convince your child that you matter. You need to make it clear that certain behaviors are not acceptable. Those are two very different things. One thing is to require basic recognition of your dignity as a person. Another, very different thing, is to beg for appreciation by using your pain as evidence. The moment you start justifying why you deserve respect, you have already given up too much ground. Because basic respect should not depend on your giving a moving presentation about all you have endured. Speak from facts. Yesterday you spoke to me this way. You interrupted me, you insulted me, you mocked me. That is not acceptable in this house. Speak from agreements. We can disagree, but we are not going to cross this line. That is solid ground. There, you are not emotionally undressing in front of someone who, in that moment, may not even have the maturity to hold what you are saying. There, you are putting structure in place. And structure carries more weight than drama, even if drama makes more noise. In the middle of conflict, many parents forget this and start speaking like wounded children in front of their own children. Do you see the tangle there? They look to the young person who is still learning how to govern themselves, to act as a moral judge and repair through understanding what feels broken inside them. But that is not their role. Do not hand your child the power to decide whether your worth exists or not, because once you do that, you are no longer parenting. You are depending. Epictetus, who was born a slave and still went on to teach inner freedom, insisted that it is not events themselves that disturb us, but the judgment we make about them. Applied here, that means something uncomfortable but liberating. Your child's disrespect is serious, yes, but what destroys you inside is often not only their behavior, but the story you tell yourself while it is happening. They do not value me. I failed. After everything, I mean nothing. And from that internal collapse, you go out and speak. Of course, that leads you to beg for recognition. That is why you need to separate two levels. One, your pain. It is real and deserves to be processed honestly, maybe in private, maybe with someone mature, maybe in silence with yourself. Two, correcting the behavior. That requires clarity, not emotional release. If you mix those two levels, everything gets contaminated. What should have been a boundary turns into an emotional dump, and a boundary soaked in desperation loses a huge amount of its strength. There is also something almost ironic about all of this. The more you explain your worth, the less you embody it. A person who honors themselves does not need to advertise their importance all the time. They communicate it through how they speak, through what they allow, and through what they stop. Nobody serious has to give a lecture every other day to prove they deserve decent treatment. They live it, they hold it, they back it up with action. And if the other person does not understand it right away, then consequences come next, not sadder and sadder monologues. Speaking from agreements also helps keep the relationship from being poisoned by accumulated resentment. Because when every argument drags the entire past into it, nothing concrete gets corrected anymore. Everything turns into an emotional soup where no one even knows exactly what they are reacting to. But when you name a specific behavior and remind them of the agreement, the conversation clears up. There is less room for manipulation, for theater, and for that deeply unproductive family sport of pulling out receipts from the soul. And here there is a quiet but enormous gain. When you stop explaining your worth, you also stop humiliating yourself by trying to get from your child something you first have to hold inside yourself. Then you no longer speak like someone who needs to be reassured. You speak like someone who has remembered their place. And from there, the energy changes. The sentence is shorter, the voice is calmer, the boundary is easier to understand, because you are no longer saying, "Please recognize what I am worth." You are saying something far more powerful. You are allowed to disagree here, but not to be disrespectful. 4. Remove benefits when there is no respect. This is the point where many people get nervous, because they are afraid of seeming harsh, cold, or unloving. But the reality is simpler. A child cannot learn that respect matters if life keeps working exactly the same way when they treat you with contempt. If they are disrespectful and still get access, favors, money, permission, unlimited attention, and your presence as if nothing happened, the message they absorb is not moral. It is practical. They can treat you badly and still collect all the same benefits. And when a behavior costs nothing, it tends to repeat itself. This is not about punishing out of anger. It is about teaching that every healthy relationship has minimum standards of treatment. In the adult world, that is how everything works all the time. If you insult the person helping you, that help is withdrawn. If you treat a relationship with contempt, it grows cold. If you act arrogantly, certain doors close. Only in many families has this strange idea taken hold that real love should put up with everything without changing anything. And no, that is not mature love. That is permissiveness dressed up as kindness. There are parents who keep solving problems, lending money, doing favors, covering carelessness, giving time and energy, even after receiving hurtful words or contemptuous attitudes. They do it because they do not want to damage the relationship, because guilt gets the better of them, or because they are afraid that consequences will push their child even farther away. But what they do not see is that by keeping all the benefits in place, they are training exactly the behavior they claim they want to correct. Their generosity ends up sabotaging their authority, and then they wonder why the child does not change. Well, because they learned quickly. The way they treat you does not affect their access. Removing benefits is not revenge, it is consistency. It is saying through actions, "My time, my help, and my resources are not available under conditions of disrespect." Notice the difference. You are not saying, "I do not love you anymore." You are saying, "I am not going to keep cooperating with a dynamic that degrades this relationship." That distinction matters, because the goal is not to destroy the bridge, but to stop people from using it to walk all over you. And this takes a great deal of firmness, because your child may react badly at first. They may call you dramatic, harsh, unfair. They may say you take everything too far. They may play the victim. They may even try to flip the board with that familiar tactic of acting offended, because for the first time someone gave them a real consequence. Nothing new under the sun. When a person gets used to receiving without caring for the relationship, any limit feels like cruelty. What a surprise. But think for a second. What are you teaching if you keep giving full access to your energy to someone who speaks to you with contempt? You are teaching that your presence has no protective value, that you are always there, no matter what they do, no matter what they say, whether they humiliate you or not. And how are they supposed to learn to measure their behavior if they never experience the link between action and consequence? Respect is not built through speeches alone. It needs structure. It needs to be felt in real life that certain lines cannot be crossed without cost. This is where it helps to be very concrete. You do not need to invent theatrical punishments or set up some cartoonish military regime. It is enough to remove what really depends on you. Extra favors, non-essential money, permissions, immediate availability, certain privileges, certain forms of support, even your presence in conversations that slip into contempt. You are not taking away basic rights or using abandonment as a weapon. You are removing relational benefits that only make sense within a minimum framework of decent treatment, and that is deeply educational. Musonius Rufus, a Stoic teacher and a man of sober discipline, argued that character is not formed through pretty words, but through consistent practice. It sounds almost obvious, but at home it gets forgotten all the time. If you say respect matters, but your actions show that nothing changes when it disappears, then the real lesson has already been taught. And it was not taught by your mouth, but by your conduct. That is why a concrete consequence carries more weight than 20 well-delivered sermons. That said, the consequence has to be clean. No insults, no humiliation, no poisonous satisfaction in making the other person suffer so they will learn. Because the moment you start enjoying the retaliation, you have left the path. The right intention is not to cause pain, but to restore order. Saying, for example, as long as you speak to me like that, I'm not going to keep helping you with this, is very different from turning every limit into an act of emotional punishment. Firmness teaches, cruelty corrupts. Do not confuse the two. And be prepared to hold the line, because removing benefits once and giving them back the moment the other person gets upset only teaches that your limit was decorative. This is where your consistency is truly tested. Will you maintain the consequence even if they accuse you of overreacting? Even if they glare at you for 2 days? Even if they try to trigger your guilt? That is the test. Not what you say when you feel inspired, but what you hold when the other person pushes to make you give in. When a child discovers that respect has a direct relationship to access to certain advantages, something begins to come into order. Not because you have filled them with fear, but because reality has stopped lying to them. Now they see that the relationship is still open, but not under just any conditions. They see that love has not disappeared, but it has stopped crawling. They see that being close to you comes with a framework, a dignity, a form. And that lesson, however much it may sting at first, can do more for their character than whole years of speeches that never turned into real consequences. 5. Train your presence, because it is not enough to be right if your whole body communicates doubt, fear, or a need for approval. Many parents set limits with the right words, but with completely defeated energy. They look at the floor, rush their speech, say too much, justify every sentence, smile out of nervousness, apologize for making the other person uncomfortable, and end up communicating the exact opposite of what they were trying to hold. The message is no longer there is a boundary here. The message is, please do not get mad at me for having one. Presence is a form of silent authority. It shows before you finish your first sentence. It is in how you enter the conversation, whether your voice races or rests, whether your gaze wanders or stays steady, whether your hands shake as if you were negotiating your right to exist. And yes, this matters much more than it seems. Because a child, especially when they are defiant, picks up immediately on whether the limit is backed by conviction or just floating there, held up only by your hope that they will listen. Look them in the eye, not with theatrical aggression, not with that ridiculous pose of a domestic predator that some people mistake for firmness. Look with steadiness. Look like someone who is not hiding, like someone who does not need to attack in order to hold their place. A steady gaze communicates something very clear. I am here. I am not going to evaporate, and I am not going to back down just because you feel uncomfortable. That carries weight, far more than a burst of grand, dramatic lines. Then come the short sentences. This point seems minor until you understand how much family disorder is fed by conversations that go on too long. The more you talk, the more material you give them to derail you, contradict you, manipulate you, or drag you into side arguments. A firm person does not give 10 explanations to support a basic boundary. They say what is needed and stay there. I am not going to accept being spoken to like that. If you want to talk, it will be respectfully. This is not continuing today, that is enough. The rest is often just anxiety dressed up as reasoning. Why is it so hard to be brief? Because brevity requires inner security. The person who feels fragile adds words to compensate. The one who fears losing the relationship tries to decorate, soften, justify, wrap the boundary in cotton so it does not seem like a boundary. And in the process, they weaken it. Sometimes a single sentence delivered calmly is worth more than 5 minutes of nervous explanations. Do you really need a 15-minute speech to say you will not accept mockery? No. What you need is to stop acting as if setting a boundary were an offense. And that brings us to a very common disease, apologizing for drawing the line. Sorry for saying this. Sorry if this bothers you. Sorry for being like this. Sorry for inconveniencing you with the outrageous idea that you should treat me with a minimum of respect. It sounds absurd when you hear it laid bare, but many people live exactly like that. They apologize for taking up moral space in their own home. They apologize for correcting, for making someone uncomfortable, for refusing to participate in emotional abuse. And then they feel invisible naturally. They train themselves to disappear. Here, Stoicism brings order again. Marcus Aurelius reminded himself that dignity of character shows in the simplicity with which a person does what they are meant to do, without theater and without seeking approval. That man led armies and dealt with real betrayals, not with drawing-room emotional tantrums. And even so, he understood something many people miss today. Firmness does not need noise. It needs alignment. If you know the boundary is right, then say it without dressing it up and without asking permission to hold it. Training your presence also means tolerating the silence that comes afterward. Because one thing is stating the boundary, and another is enduring the seconds that follow when the other person stares at you, gets upset, tries to intimidate you, or waits for you to fill the space with more words. Many people betray themselves right there. They start over-talking out of anxiety. They soften their own firmness. They explain again. They back off an inch, then another, and in less than a minute, the boundary is mush. Learning to stay quiet after saying what needed to be said is part of the training. Do not forget the body either. Standing upright, not invading aggressively, not pointing your finger as if you were acting in a bad soap opera, these are not aesthetic details. They are part of the message. Your body can turn a correction into a threat or into an adult presence. And you do not need to look dangerous. You need to look clear. It needs to be obvious that you are not fighting out of ego, but holding a legitimate line. Over time, this presence changes the entire relationship. Because your child begins to sense that they are no longer standing in front of someone easy to throw off balance. They no longer have a figure in front of them who breaks, speeds up, or starts justifying themselves the moment tension appears. They have a person in front of them who takes up their place without apologizing for existing morally. And that, even if they do not admit it right away, has a deep effect. Respect begins long before agreement. It begins when the other person notices that you have stopped shrinking in front of their challenge. 6. Do not argue through sarcasm or mockery. The moment a conversation enters that territory, everything useful is over. There is no search for truth anymore, no correction, no listening, no relationship. What remains is degradation. There is contempt disguised as cleverness, insolence dressed up as a joke, cowardly aggression covered with irony. And if you stay there trying to continue as if it was still a serious conversation, you make a serious mistake. You are legitimizing the mud. Sarcasm has a poisonous trait. It always tries to leave the other person in a ridiculous position. It is not trying to solve anything. It is trying to lower your value in its own eyes, in front of others, or in front of the whole atmosphere. It is a small ceremony of superiority, a sneer turned into language. And when it comes from a child toward a father or mother, it should not be taken lightly, because it is not just bad manners. It is a sign that the relationship is losing moral verticality. Many parents, because they do not stop it in time, enter the game. They answer with more sarcasm, with a sharper insult, with a supposedly brilliant irony that gets a bitter laugh or leaves everyone tense. And there you have two generations trading darts as if the house were some humiliation contest. What an educational triumph. Then someone says it was all a joke, that no one should overreact, that people need to know how to take it. No. Sustained mockery is not healthy humor. It is a way of eroding another person's dignity without owning the blow. That is why the rule must be clear. At the first hit of sarcasm or mockery, the conversation stops. You do not threaten for 5 minutes. You do not give a lecture on irony in Western civilization. You stop it. If you want to talk, we will talk without mockery. I am not continuing in this tone, and then you leave. That clean exit sends a very powerful message. With me, contempt does not get a stage, because every extra minute inside that dynamic makes it stronger. Some people fear that ending the conversation will make them look weak or defeated, as if stepping out of the muck were losing. But the truth is the opposite. Staying and arguing with someone who is ridiculing you does weaken you, because you are agreeing to fight on ground designed to dirty you. Stepping away firmly, on the other hand, protects the structure of the relationship. It shows that not every format of exchange is acceptable. What is the point of winning one line if the whole conversation degraded you? What kind of authority needs to answer a sneer with an even more elaborate sneer? It is worth remembering Epictetus again here, because he had a brutal clarity about this. He taught that no one can harm you morally without your inner consent. Translate that into this situation. The other person's mockery exists, yes, but you decide whether you are going to step onto that carousel of contempt or plant yourself outside it. That does not make the disrespect harmless. What it does is keep it from capturing you. And when it does not capture you, your response becomes much cleaner and much stronger. Stopping the conversation does not mean evading it forever. It means postponing it until there are minimum human conditions. This point is essential. The goal is not to sweep the issue under the rug with an elegant retreat. The goal is to state clearly that the topic will be addressed again, but only under a different framework. That teaches your child something very valuable. The relationship remains open, but not at any price. There is room for disagreement, discomfort, even anger, but not for contempt, turned into a performance. And pay attention to this, because sarcasm often becomes a habit in environments where no one really shuts it down. At first, it seems like an occasional escape valve, then it becomes a style. Later, it turns into an identity. And when a family adopts mockery as a normal form of relationship, affection rots even if they still share a table. No one speaks directly anymore. Everyone jabs, uses irony, hides behind jokes, throws little digs, and then pretends nothing happened. It is a worn-out, cowardly, sad way of living together. That is why your intervention matters so much. Not only for you, but for your child's character. Because someone who learns to use mockery to dodge responsibility or dominate conversations will suffer for it later in life. Outside the home, not everyone is going to applaud that supposed sharpness. Sometimes they will find closed doors, broken relationships, and isolation they do not understand, precisely because no one taught them in time that constant sarcasm is not strength. It is immaturity with makeup on. When you return to the conversation later, do it without theatrical resentment. Do not come back collecting the offense in the tone of an insulted judge. Go back to the issue, name what happened, and make it clear that the conversation will only continue if respect is maintained. That turns the break into a tool of order, not a display of power. And that difference is decisive. Because your goal is not to win an emotional arm wrestling match. It is to teach that contempt ends the conversation, and respect makes it possible. Something so basic and yet so often forgotten. The real strength here is not in finding a more cutting response, but in refusing to take part in a dynamic that lowers everyone involved. That is the kind of self-control a child, even if they do not applaud it in the moment, ends up registering. They see that they can no longer push you into the terrain of mockery in order to control the interaction. They see that the tactic has lost its power. And when a tactic stops working, it begins to die. Just like that. No scandal, no circus. just as behaviors should die when they survive only because someone keeps giving them a stage. 7. Redefine your role in their life. This is the deepest point of all because it is no longer just about correcting bad behavior, but about examining who you have become within the relationship. There are parents who have spent so many years being available for everything, solving, tolerating, cushioning, chasing, explaining, and rescuing, that without realizing it, they have trained their children in a dangerous idea. That they will always be there no matter how they are treated, that their presence is automatic, that their help comes with no moral condition, that their time falls from the sky the way rain does, and then they are surprised when they receive demands instead of respect. Being always available is not the same as loving well. Sometimes it is fear. Fear of losing closeness, fear of seeming harsh, fear that the child will pull away, fear of no longer being needed. And out of that fear, many people build a form of presence that looks generous on the outside, but is broken on the inside. Because it does not come from freedom. It comes from anxiety. It does not come from dignity. It comes from the need to keep occupying a place in the other person's life, even if that place is becoming smaller and more humiliating. It is worth pausing for a second here. Your child does not need a father or mother who is endlessly available at their own expense. They need a figure who respects themselves enough not to lay themselves out on a platter every time they are called, every time they are used, every time they are sought only when convenient. And this does not mean becoming cold or distant. It means recovering symbolic value. Because what is always there, what always answers, what always gives in, what always rescues ends up seeming like part of the furniture. Useful, yes, appreciated, not necessarily. Redefining your role means your presence stops being obvious and becomes meaningful again. It means you are no longer just the person who solves the problem, lends the money, listens to the disrespect, tolerates the tone, and still stays there with a tired smile. No, after a certain point, continuing to function that way is not nobility. It is surrender. It is teaching your child that they can turn to you without honoring you. And even if you taught that lesson unintentionally, now it is your job to dismantle it. Musonius Rufus insisted that a right life is not merely preached, it is embodied. And that lands directly here. Because you can say 1,000 times that respect matters, but if the way you show up in your children's lives contradicts that truth, they will believe your conduct, not your words. If they always have full access to you even when they treat you with contempt, then the real message is already perfectly clear. Your love can be used without caring for you. And that is not some higher virtue, that is moral disorder in the relationship. That is why you need to start becoming someone who honors themselves. Someone who loves, yes, but does not crawl. Someone who supports, yes, but does not allow themselves to be used. Someone who is present, yes, but not in just any way, and not at just any cost. Sometimes that means answering less quickly. Sometimes it means not rushing in to rescue problems that are not yours to solve. Sometimes it means not returning a call immediately, not offering help automatically, not continuing a conversation if it comes loaded with disdain. It seems small, but it rearranges a great deal. And here comes an uncomfortable but necessary question. Is your presence in your child's life being valued today, or is it simply being consumed? Because there is a huge difference. What has value is cared for. What is merely consumed is taken for granted. And when you become someone who is taken for granted, respect starts to erode without anyone even naming it. That is why redefining your role is not a whim of wounded pride. It is a measure of relational health. And this is actually good for the child too, even if they do not understand it at first, because it forces them to face a reality they will have to learn sooner or later. People are not there to serve you unconditionally while you neglect them. Relationships require form, reciprocity, consideration. If they do not learn that at home, life will teach it to them much more harshly. And it is better for them to learn it from you through firmness and love than against a world that will not always be patient with their arrogance. Redefining your role also gives you back something you may have lost years ago. Peace. The peace of no longer living preoccupied with pleasing, rescuing, compensating, being constantly ready out of fear that the other person will grow cold toward you. That peace is worth gold. Because when you stop chasing your place in your children's lives and start inhabiting it with dignity, your voice changes, your posture changes, your whole energy changes. You no longer act like someone afraid of being replaced. You act like someone who has understood that love does not require self-degradation in order to keep existing. And paradoxically, that is often when the other person begins to move. Because they notice the difference. They notice they can no longer access you in the same way. They notice a new consistency, a new height, a new calm. They notice that you did not leave, but you are no longer offering yourself the way you used to. And that transformation often creates something sermons never do. Awareness. Awareness that your presence was not some automatic right, but a gift sustained over years that deserved more care than it received. In the end, this point is not about becoming inaccessible. It is about becoming whole. Stop being always available so you can become truly worthy of respect. And when that happens, the most important change does not always happen in your children first. It happens in you. You recover your center. You recover your place. You recover that way of being in the world that does not need to beg for consideration because it communicates it fully. And from there, finally, you stop trying to make people respect you through pain and start teaching respect through the way you treat yourself. If your children ignore you or treat you disrespectfully, the way out is not to shout louder, suffer more deeply, or repeat 1,000 times how much you have given them. The way out is to regain command of yourself, bring order back into the relationship, and stop rewarding what degrades it. Because respect in a family is not begged for, improvised, or won through exhaustion. It is built when someone decides to hold boundaries with calm, consequences with consistency, and presence with dignity. Now it is your turn to take this into your real life. Not admire it as a nice idea while everything stays the same at home. The next time the challenge shows up, do not respond the way you used to. Pause. Change the setting. Stop the mockery. Remove the access that you yourself have been giving away without boundaries. And above all, remember this. Loving a child does not include allowing them to drag you into a dynamic where you lose your place. Your task is not to be useful at any cost. Your task is to be a moral reference point that does not betray itself when it is most tested. If this video stirred something in you, subscribe to the channel and write this phrase in the comments, "I am Stoic." And also tell me what country you are watching from, because I want to read you and keep building with you this community of people who are tired of living from guilt, disorder, and people-pleasing. We are not here to fall asleep inside excuses. We are here to recover character. Gabriel here. This is the Stoic Garden. On the screen, I'm going to leave you 2 videos that can help you go even deeper into this process, because a home only truly changes when someone changes inside first. Click into one of them and keep working on your posture, your calm, and your boundaries. Peace is not begged for. Peace is built with dignity.